Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and members of the public present in the room with us, and whoever may be following us on YouTube either now or in the future. Welcome. I am Councillor Ian Edwards. I am Chairman of the Central and South Planning Committee. As I was saying, this meeting is captured on CCTV. However, members of the public sitting in the room are not on screen. Only anybody that comes forward to address the committee. Very quick bit of the formalities before we get into the meeting proper. Fire alarm, one isn't expected this evening. If it does sound, we will be evacuating. Members of the public, needn't concern yourselves. The best way out is the way you came in, through the double doors there, and then to the double doors immediately in front of you and down a spiral staircase. We will escort you. If those doors are blocked for any reason, there is a fire escape behind us as well. We will be leaving with you, so there's nothing to worry about. Mobile and tablets, please can I ask anybody to turn them down to silent, including members of the public. Residents' feedback forms. If any member of the public wishes to provide feedback about the meeting, the way it's run, forms are provided and they're also available online, drop-down menu. We do encourage people to provide their feedback so that we can improve the way we run the meeting and to make them as accessible and understandable as possible to members of the public. Okay, they're the sort of bits. We have a little bit of business to run through, which we march through very quickly, and then we get into the actual planning applications. But before we do that, I'll just spend 2 minutes to introduce you to everybody around the table and explain who they are and what they do. The planning committee is made up of councillors, and they are the voting members of the committee. And I'll introduce them to you. On my far left-hand side, Councillor Birra, Councillor Dillon, Councillor Duncan. My far right-hand side, Councillor Brightman, Councillor Chamdal, Councillor Ahmed Walana, Chapman, and then Yarrow. In the event of a tie, I, as chairman, will have the deciding vote. Otherwise, my role is to chair the meeting. The other people around the table are officers of the council and are here to assist the planning committee on technical matters. On my far left-hand side is Nicole Cameron, who's our legal officer. Luke Taylor, Democratic Services and Clerk of the meeting. James Rogers, Head of Planning. Meg Harani is a planning team leader, and he's presenting the applications. And Ahmed Akram is the highways engineer, give us transport advice. So that's the way the meeting's people around the table. Although we're meeting in public, it isn't a public meeting, therefore there's no general speaking rights. And the only petition item has been withdrawn. There being no petitions, the only people that may address the council the meeting tonight will be councillors, should any attend and express an interest to speak. Okay, so let's very quickly get into the first few items of the agenda. Apologies for absence.
There are none.
Thank you. Declarations of interest coming before us tonight. Councillor Chamdal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got on item number 11. I did have a resident who inquired about asbestos, which was referred to officers for clarification and a response. But I will be staying in the room.
Okay, so the actual planning application was no time discussed?
No, it did have a planning application number, but no description of anything. All it has mentioned was concerns about asbestos removal.
Thank you, and that is not relevant directly to the planning consideration. We're okay, comfortable with remaining in the room. Thank you very much. So, to sign and receive the minutes of the previous meeting, they should be in our pack, colleagues, and that is the meeting of the 30th of October. They agreed? Thank you. Item 4, matters notified in advance are urgent. There are none. Item 5, Part 1, Part 2. All of the meeting that we run in public, and including live CCTV, is in Part 1, and they are the general planning applications. There are items in Part 2, which are held in private, and they are matters around enforcement, and we discuss those in private because they could end up in action taking against members of the public, and it is not in the public interest to be discussing matters of evidence at this stage. The actual issue is described in the agenda, and the decision of the committee is published. So the only bit you don't hear is the actual discussion around it. Okay, so we're now moving into item 6, which has been withdrawn. Item 7. We will get through these planning applications quickly to get to what I believe is likely to be the issue tonight. But we will go through the order as it makes it easier with the presentation. 7 and 8, one single presentation, please, on Enterprise House, 2 separate votes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Very quickly, this is an application for telecoms equipment to be situated on the roof of Enterprise House in Blythe Road. The application site is a listed building grade 2, and therefore you have an application for listed building consent as well. It is a replacement of some equipment and some new equipment, and your officers consider that it's unlikely to impact on the character of the listed building or the visual impact on the street scene, and therefore they've recommended approval. I would point out the informative, which says that this has reached saturation point and that it's unlikely that we would approve any further equipment on this building. If I can just show you, probably the photographs is the best. This is the existing elevation and the proposed, and as you can see, very little difference. There is some additional equipment which is probably not very apparent, but is sort of sited in those areas and attached here, and that's the sighting of it, looking at it from the side and the other side. So in essence the equipment is going on this element here. And that's just looking at it from the rear. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. There is an addendum item on this one, just to clarify the colour scheme required of these bits, which is to keep it in the same colour as the tower, whatever that may be. Okay. Yes. Colleagues, relatively straightforward. Councillor Dillon? Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Councillor Yarrow, that is on item 7, the actual application, and for the listed building consent, the same. Thank you. Thank you very much, Councillor Yarrow. Show of hands, please, on that. That's everybody. Thank you. Agenda item 9, 29 Manor Lane.
Again, very quickly, Chairman, this is an application for a porch to the front, and it complies. It is a fairly large porch, but it is acceptable. There is an existing canopy of a similar size, and it's just infilling underneath that in reality. So if I can again go straight to the plans and photographs. The existing situation, that's the existing, and then the canopy is flat roofed, that proportion there, and the proposed, and this element here. So that's the existing canopy, which is to be removed and replaced by the porch. Again, no impact or very little impact on the street scene, and therefore your officers have recommended approval. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Councillor Yarrow?
Thank you, Chairman. No, I have no problem with this at all. I move the officers' recommendations.
Thank you very much. Councillor Ahmed Boilana? Thank you. Show of hands, please, on this one. It's everybody. Thank you. 10, 3 Evergreen Way.
Again, hopefully very quickly, application for a single-storey rear extension. It is a replacement extension. I can show you the plans again. That is the existing plans at the top, and then the proposed, and you can see the existing and proposed situation. There is in fact a reduction in the depth of the extension, although slightly wider. So that's the extension there, which is to be replaced. And again, no impact on the adjoining occupiers, and recommended for approval. Thank you, Chairman.
Move officer's recommendation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman. This is an application. This is an application for demolition of a number of garages and its replacement with 4 3-bedroom dwelling houses, 2 stories with rooms in the roof. The proposal, in your officer's view, complies with the requirements that are set out in the supplementary planning document relating to residential layouts in terms of the impact on adjoining occupiers. It is a site which is sited to the rear of properties on Clammas Way and Worcester Road. Therefore, it's not very apparent from the main highways, and therefore its impact on the street scene and its visual impact is considered acceptable. It's probably best if I just show you the plans. That is the existing situation. You can see the existing garages, and then this is the proposal. These are the main stories. These elements that protrude out to the front are 2 stories, but they're at a lower level, as the elevations will show. So these are the floor plans and the roof plan. So the elements that did protrude forward of the buildings are these elements here, and then the rear elevation and the side elevations. This is a plan which shows the distances from properties around, and you can see that in the main they comply with the 15 metres. There are points where these distances here have not been shown, and they, again, if you take a straight line from a window in this position to the point where it might intersect a property, that would be more than 15 metres. I measured it at approximately 19, and if you, in this particular position here, again, if you took a measurement direct line from here to a point where it intersects the property there, I measured that at 14.6 metres. So in the main it complies with the requirements of the council's SPD. In terms of the size of the dwellings, they all comply with the London Plan and national standards. The amenity space requirements are met and the parking requirements are met. So your officers consider the application or the development to be acceptable and have recommended approval. If I can just show you the photographs of the site. This is the site. There has been some dumping on it and the access to it, and then the actual garages. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harani. Councillor Mills, I understand you wish to speak to the committee. You come forward. This is slightly unusual in that Councillor Mills is the site is not actually in the ward that Councillor Mills represents. However, it is absolutely on the boundary, and the residents that he does represent are impacted by this application, and therefore I have said that he can speak. Okay, so you have your normal time. Lights will be shown. Thank you. 3.
Thank you very much. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak, given the situation. So I'm here tonight to speak in support of local residents that, as described, very much border onto this proposal and in objection to the application that's before you. And I think whilst residents aren't against, obviously, housing being built in the borough, it's purely the size of this development and its specific location that they feel is unsuitable and causing concern amongst many people. Firstly, there are huge concerns around access to the site. This has already been demonstrated through a real-life example recently. Only a couple of weeks ago, a fire engine was unable to get along the road due to construction vehicles that were blocking along Worcester Road, which is where you can see the access point. So that's a real-life example that's happened. And whilst measurements, policies and conditions are all great in theory, as I say, this has been witnessed in actual life by residents and experienced that this really is a problem. Take this on then for larger vehicles such as our own refuse vehicles, it's going to be an additional problem. Construction is going to block the road up and access is going to continue to be an issue. In regards to traffic movements, highways have commented they expect the number of movements to be less than there currently are. This is something I would sort of question, because when 4 family homes are anticipated to replace a number of derelict and unused garages, to me that signifies an increase in traffic movements. As I said, those garages that are there, a number of them are in a state of disrepair, not used. Those that possibly are used would be for long-term storage and certainly not having regular visitors like 4 family houses would do. Therefore, within the highway comment section 7.10 of the report, that's something I strongly disagree with and would ask members to follow up and challenge this issue. The report goes on to highlight that there's a lack of public transport available in this area, therefore there's a high reliance on cars for residents. Again, suggests lots of activity in and out. Compound that with the large vehicles that I've talked about being unable to access up that side road, close proximity to St Lawrence Primary School, and there's clearly a traffic impact there. Development overlooks the rear of the properties in Worcester Road, particularly numbers 69, 71, 73, particularly relevant for plot 4 that you can see on the diagram, which is going to be built right up to the rear garden boundary of those properties. Officers mentioned that distances have to be more than 15 metres. Comment was made that one was 14.6 and it mostly complies. Surely all of these need to comply, and if it's less, then it doesn't fit. Property described as 2-storey, in fact, with rooms being built in the loft. Residents clearly see that as a 3-storey property, and those windows will be overlooking out of the southern-facing boundary, which again are overlooking the gardens and rears of those properties. Obscure glass is proposed as a condition for the bathrooms, but that's only going to prevent onlooking. The overlooking aspect, both into the gardens and the reduction of light into those properties, will still remain. Regarding plot 4, again, the garden for that is considerably smaller.
Before you do a close there, Councillor.
To draw to a close, I believe the proposals submitted are not in keeping with the character, and thank you for your time. Hopefully you can see the stress this is causing additional construction.
Thank you. Colleagues, are there any questions at all? Councillor Mills, matter of clarification. Thank you very much, sir. Okay, I picked up a couple of issues that have been raised here. In fact, a number of issues that are raised here that I will ask officers to comment on. Firstly, the access issue, emergency services and refuse. So can we have a discussion, please, or can you please advise us about what considerations have been given about access by emergency services to this new plot, and what are the refuse collection arrangements for this new plot? That's the first issue. The second one, highways, if there could be an explanation as to why the traffic movements you believe have decreased, and I think that is as much to do with us having to consider them as usable garages rather than their present derelict state, but you need to comment. The third one is the 2-3-storey aspect. That's just a little technical bit, but I think it would help members of the public to understand how we are viewing this and whether or not this is whether it's just a semantic issue. And the final bit is the outlook, daylight, sunlight impact on the neighbouring properties. So can we take up, please, the emergency service and refuse access issue?
Thank you, Chairman. Having looked at the proposals compared to the existing what the site's currently used for, it's considered that a fire engine and service delivery vehicles are able to get through that access road. It's over 3 metres wide at present, which is single length, so should a vehicle be required to use that lane, it could do so. It's fully compliant with highways policy and current legislation, so we wouldn't be able to sustain a reason for refusal on that basis. In terms of the addressing the number of vehicle movements in terms of the trip rates associated with the site currently accommodates 35 individual garages, which is safe to say that historically there are 35 individual units currently associated with that site. When compared that to the 4 residential dwellings, it's a significant reduction in movements, and again, we as a highway authority wouldn't be able to sustain that as a reason for refusal at an appeal scenario, so I wouldn't be comfortable refusing that on that basis.
Okay, so just to explain that, at the moment it is usable as 35 garages and could be reinstated as 35 garages, and from a planning perspective we have to consider traffic movements associated with 35 garages, and we set against that the impact of the 4 houses. That is what we are obliged to consider. Okay. Now, the issue of the access haven't probably been answered about refuse, because my recollection is that our refuse department will only reverse a limited number of yards. How is refuse collected from these properties?
Well, in terms of waste collection, in accordance with current highway guidance, waste collection vehicles need to get within 25-30 metres of the site of the access. Now, as far as I can recall, that access length is measured somewhat 30-odd metres. Now, occupants don't have to, can walk a maximum distance of 30-odd metres to the site as well, to the refuse collection point in terms of bins. So, in terms of waste collection, again, it's fully in compliance with the current Manual for Streets guidance. Again, highway guidance, so it's perfectly acceptable.
Thank you. There's not an expectation that our refuse lorries will be entering the parking area at the front of the houses. It's just a matter of either driving into or reversing into the access road.
So it'd have to reverse into the access way.
Okay, thank you. So we've done the access, traffic movements. Now, I know that members will have some questions about that, but let's hear it from the officers first. Comment about 2-3 stories and explain to members of the public how we are viewing this and what the issues are in its description.
The proposed side elevation, as you can see, it does have rooms in the roof. You could construe it as 3 stories, but if I go to the photographs, that's a 2-story property of a similar size to the one that's proposed. So, in essence, it's a 2-story with rooms in the roof, if you like.
Okay, but the issue here is that we are looking at plans, not a description, and that we're very clear on the plans of what it represents. And if we needed to, we could secure from the plans the actual height of the buildings and compare that to adjacents, if that were an issue for members. Thank you. And the last bit, the daylight, sunlight and outlook, the impact on the properties in Worcester and Klamath, please.
Again, I've did some measurements in terms of the 45-degree angles from the nearest windows in the properties in Worcester Road, numbers 67 to 73, who are the most affected, and numbers 54 and, if I can just follow this plan, 54 and 52 Klamath Way. In terms of 54 and 52 Klamath Way, at a 45-degree angle, the nearest point from any of the windows in those properties would be about 18 metres, and so that would comply with the 15 metres. In terms of Worcester Road properties, the most affected would be numbers 67, 69 and 71, and the nearest again would be 14.4 metres as I measured it at a 45-degree angle. So 15 metres being the requirement, we're talking about 600 millimetres being under on one of the properties, and your officers consider that it will be difficult to defend that on appeal. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, just for the purpose of clarity, from my understanding, are you saying that the distance between the northernmost points of the properties 67, 69 and the southernmost building line of number 4, plot 4, is 15 metres?
So if you took a 45-degree angle either way...
No, the closest distance between that wall of number 4 and that window, or that end of that, because we don't know what that is. We don't know.
That's a single-storey The two-storey elements are all in a single line at the back here. So anything beyond this line is a single-storey element. It does have a window in there, and it's likely to be a kitchen, but it's difficult to tell.
No, I'd like the closest distance between the wall, that wall, and that building there.
If you took
What's that distance?
A line here.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Sorry, Mr. Roger.
I was just going to add, obviously members need to bear in mind that you've got existing garages there, so it's not an arrangement where there's just an open outlook over fields or anything. There's already some loss of outlook from the garages, so you've got to add that into your decision-making process.
Absolutely accepted. Colleagues, I've raised the issues that were raised by the councillor. We've had some information on that. You may wish some further clarification, so I open it to you colleagues. Councillor Yarrow.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, when I first looked at this, I'm afraid it always appears to me, or it appeared to me in this instance, that it's one of these on-balance things. It could be yes, it could be no, and what we're here tonight to do is to try and tease out which way is it. One of the questions I want to ask is, where is the refuse to be collected from?
So I was wondering whether to come in on that, because that was the one point I was potentially going to add to colleagues. So condition 6.2a requires details of refuse storage, including a management plan. Now, members will be aware with family houses, we often don't ask for refuse details. It tends to be asked for with flats. The reason effectively it's been asked for here is we need to have a refuse collection point indicated on the plans. Now, there's a huge hard standing in front of parking spaces 1 to 8, and so I would assume the refuse collection point would be the back of number 65. And as explained by the highway engineer, effectively that would mean you'd have less than 30 metres for the refuse vehicles to reverse and less than 30 metres for the householders to carry their refuse. But effectively we are conditioning the final refuse details to be agreed and a management plan.
Thank you. Councillor Chamdal.
Thank you, Chairman. Some clarification again on the refuge collection. You said they've got a reverse down. I remember other applications, they drive down, they have enough turning circle within that area. Would the refuge vehicle have enough turning circle there? Because at the moment it looks like, what can we fit in? So the refuge vehicle reverses 30 metres down the access road. The refuge is brought out to a certain point where it's another 30 metres. It seems very scientific in that sense. So in terms of, do we have enough turning circle for the refuge vehicle actually go inside?
Thank you, Chairman. Well, as part of the submit details, what will happen is wet path analysis drawings will be provided. So we'll either show refuse vehicles either having to reverse into the access road, 30 metres, or pulling in forward again and having to reverse back out onto Worcester Road. Now, worst case scenario, as with multiple properties along Worcester Road, what will happen is a refuse vehicle will have to reverse into the access road with a sweat path analysis drawing demonstrating that. In which point occupants will then have to walk to the refuse storage point, dropping off their waste.
Sorry, can I come back on that, sir? Now, again, would it be safe for them actually would they have a turning circle space from Worcester Road into the access road? Because there's no markings in terms of there's no yellow, double yellow or single yellows on there. If vehicles are parked on both sides, I can't see how, going off what Councillor Mills said, that a emergency vehicle had difficulty getting down there or not able to get down there. How would the refuge vehicle actually turn in there then? Safely?
Well, again, that will have to be demonstrated on the sweat path analysis drawing. If it can't be, worst case scenario will be collected on street, but then that will have to be determined at the detail stage.
Councillor Yarrow, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, that leads me to say that we don't have enough information to make any real decision on this tonight. If we haven't got the track analysis, and various things are not quite clear as to what we want, I don't see how we can make a proper decision on something which is clearly going to affect a lot of other people. So consequently, I think I'm going to move that I think we should defer this for a site visit and for an analysis of just where the turning circles are going to be and how it's going to work.
Thank you very much. Councillor Duncan?
I wouldn't disagree with deferring it. I don't have a problem about the waste or the access specifically. I understand it. But I would like to know, on these properties 67, 69, etc., the plan, these are not extensions. These are not single-storey rear extensions. These narrow bits that join on with there's a common boundary with the adjoining property. And I'm not sure, but I think these may have been former council properties built to a particular plan in the 50s. I'm not sure about that, and that's something that a site visit would clarify. But I think if it is like that, these were stores and outbuildings at that time, but they were brick built and built onto the houses. So that would affect this issue of the distance, which I would like clarification about. I think all of us would. And that would be a particular point that I would want to see on site. I think Councillor Mills spoke quite rightly about the congestion caused by construction traffic, which can be considerable. And I do know the school, and it is a very busy area. It's always very well parked up, and sometimes it's difficult to drive down and get access to the school if something's coming the other way, because it virtually just runs on one side of the road, so you have to wait for oncoming traffic. But construction traffic issues are always temporary and can be overcome by specific means for that time. So I wouldn't feel too concerned about that, because this is not some long ongoing project like HS2 where it's going to inconvenience people for 10 years. I mean, this hopefully, if anything did go ahead, would be of a much shorter duration and controllable. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, we've had proposal that we defer this for further information and a site visit. A site visit for us to look at the access arrangements and particularly the impact on the surrounding houses. In the meantime, I think the swept path analysis needs to be drawn up. We need the clarification on the actual distances, the closest distances between the extensions from the rear building line of these properties and the new building. We'd like to know exactly what they are. We want clarity on the use of those extensions and the windows so that we can determine the impact on the use of those. And this is both Worcester Road and Clammas. And I actually also believe we need a daylight sunlight impact assessment, not only on those windows but also the rear gardens, because there may be a degree of overshadowing that we want to make sure is acceptable. Okay, so I'd like to see that. With that information and our site visit, I believe we should be in a position to make an informed decision. Do colleagues have any other additional needs around that one at all? Councillor Chamdal?
Yes, Chairman. Just a minor one on page 78, fourth paragraph down. It's mentioned that it's acknowledged that the proposed development could potentially be glimpsed from the gaps between the buildings. So I think it'd be an idea if we did have the site visit, we could see what this glimpsed view would be.
Thank you. We'll take a note of that and also see to what extent this development will be visible from the existing street scene. Okay, that complete. So we've had it moved and seconded by Councillor Yarrow and Councillor Ahmed. Bolano, show of hands please on the deferment. That's everybody. Thank you. What does that mean? We're going to defer it. We're going to come and look at the site. We will be looking at the access arrangements for the refuse lorries. We're going to be looking at the impact of this proposed development on the amenity of the existing properties, daylight, sunlight, impact including the back gardens. We're going to look at distances to make sure it's policy compliant. We want to understand the use of the rooms that are the extensions of those properties around it, so that when we have all of that information, we can then make a decision about policy compliance or otherwise in this property. And it is a balance. Everything doesn't have to be wholly policy compliant. These are guidelines. This is about trying to get the best. We also recognise, though, that we need to deliver housing and that housing is a benefit. Okay, so that's the balance that will be drawn, but we can't draw that without the right information which will secure that. Okay? Thank you. It will come back to committee, definitely. It will come back again. Okay. Thank you very much. We move on then, please, to number 12, which is 9 The High Street. This is 12 and 13 together, very similar applications.
Thank you, Chairman. This is an application for a change of use or an additional use, if you like, rather than a change of use to from a retail use to a mixed use comprising retail and cafe stroke restaurant. It is for a Costa, and as explained on page 91, it's difficult to define what a Costa is, whether it's a retail use or whether it's a mixed use or whether it's a cafe restaurant use, because of the way that they operate. And it's similar to coffee shops everywhere, not just Costa, obviously. And therefore we've taken the view that in this particular location it's not going to impact on the viability or vitality of the shopping centre. It's most likely to add to it, and therefore we've recommended approval on that basis. The second application is for alterations to the shop front the proposal also involves alterations to the shop front. The second application is for the signs that are associated with that use. So if I can just go through the plans. I'm sure you probably don't need to look at the frontages. They're not much different wherever you go. So that's the existing, and I can, if it goes back, the proposed. It's probably an improvement in terms of its appearance, so we're recommending approval. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Okay, colleagues. Councillor Duncan?
I think although it's a retail use at the moment, it's such a sort of niche market, really, that one would almost expect that to be an online provision. I never see anybody in that shop, ever, when I go past it. They must have customers to have kept open. But I do think having a Costa there, so close to the station, the bus station, people coming back from shopping, people waiting for a train, it's probably quite a good idea and quite a good service and complements that particular area. So, yes, I'm happy with it.
Thank you very much. Before we formally move this, can I just look at the wording of condition 4 and ask whether or not we are clear in law about there should be no cooking? Because if somebody says, here's my sandwich, stick it in a toaster, are they cooking? And are we preventing part of this business from operating?
Cooking isn't necessarily defined in legislation, but cooking obviously has a very general term definition. If you were to look at it in the dictionary, it would give you a very clear view. Reheating of food is not cooking, and I think that the wording of the condition is sufficient in that it says that items pre-manufactured off-site and reheated on the premises, there shall be no cooking. It's almost as if there shall be no cooking is just a re-emphasis on the point that obviously it's just to heat food, and that should be sufficient. It should be clear for people reading it what it means.
Fine, so it is enforceable by us.
It is enforceable.
Thank you very much. That was the only clarification.
You will be able to get a toasty.
I didn't want to set up a Costa and not allow them to do half their business. I mean, that would be most unfortunate. Councillor Alfie-Wallana.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with Councillor Duncan, and we do have a 2 Costa on the other side of High Street, but it's quite barren, and I think this is a good initiative by the applicant to add Costa into his shop if there's no one, there are no customers, so that would be a good idea. So I fully support this application.
Are you moving?
Yes.
You're moving the officers' you seconding? Thank you very much. Show of hands, please, on this one. That's a planning application 12, and on the lit illuminated fascia and projecting sign, item 13. Same again? Thank you. Show of hands, that's everybody, thank you. We're now going to move into part 2, so we just break the link.